The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council station hummed with energy as representatives from dozens of worlds gathered for the emergency session. The massive structure orbited Nexus Prime, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the star-filled void beyond. Inside the main chamber, beings of various shapes and sizes took their positions around the circular platform. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors with steady steps, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style that seemed plain, compared to the elaborate appearances of other delegates. Her human features looked unremarkable next to the towering Andromedans with their crystalline skin, or the serpentine Veltar, whose scales shimmered in rainbow patterns. Even her simple black diplomatic uniform appeared dull beside the ornate robes and energy fields that adorned the other species. As she entered the chamber, Elena felt the familiar weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Some gazed with curiosity, others with barely concealed contempt. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for only 3 years, and many still questioned whether they belonged there at all. The session began with the deep, resonant voice of Chancellor Morden, a Zephyrian whose ancient species had ruled vast sectors of space for millennia. His translucent blue form flickered with patterns of light as he spoke. "We gather today to discuss the Deep Space Exploration Initiative," he announced. "This joint venture will map the uncharted regions beyond our galaxy's rim. The knowledge gained will benefit all civilized worlds for generations to come." Elena leaned forward in her seat, interested. Earth scientists had been preparing proposals for this project for months. Humanity's natural curiosity and their talent for exploration made them ideal candidates for such a mission. The Veltar representative, Ambassador Isakala, raised one of her forearms. Her snake-like head swayed as she spoke in her species' characteristic hissing tone. "Before we discuss the project details, we must address as it concerns us the proposal to include the humans in this undertaking." A murmur ran through the chamber. Elena kept her expression neutral, though she felt her heart rate increase slightly. "The humans are enthusiastic," continued Isakala, her forked tongue flicking out briefly, "but enthusiasm is not enough for such a delicate mission. Their species is young, impulsive. They lack the wisdom that comes as with age." Ambassador Kelvin of the Andromedans nodded his massive head. His voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder. "The humans have proven themselves unpredictable in past situations. Their emotional responses often override logical decision-making. Such traits could endanger any exploration mission." Elena stood slowly. "If I may respond to these concerns." Chancellor Morden gestured for her to proceed, though his manner suggested he was merely following protocol rather than showing genuine interest in her words. "Humanity understands that we are newcomers to this council," Elena began. "We also understand that our methods may seem different from yours, but we have successfully explored and colonized dozens of worlds in our sector. Our exploration techniques have led to discoveries that we have freely shared with all council members." "Yes," hissed Isakala. "Your intuitive methods have had some lucky results, sis. But luck is not a reliable foundation for such an important mission." The Centauran ambassador, Quill, spoke up in support. "The humans have shown remarkable adaptability and problem-solving abilities. Their archaeological work on the ruins of Kepler 442b provided insights that our best scientists had missed for decades." "Primitive enthusiasm," dismissed Chancellor Morden. "They stumbled upon interesting artifacts, nothing more. True understanding requires patience and systematic analysis, qualities that develop only through centuries of careful cultivation." Elena felt a familiar frustration building inside her, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, Chancellor, our primitive enthusiasm has led to breakthrough discoveries in 17 different fields. Our medical techniques have saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. Our agricultural methods have ended famines on methods that you freely distribute without proper consideration," interrupted the Andromedan. "A mature species understands the value of knowledge and guards it appropriately. We share our discoveries because cooperation benefits everyone," Elena replied. "When one species prospers, all species have the opportunity to learn and grow." The chamber filled with what could only be described as polite but dismissive laughter. The sound came from a dozen different species, each expressing amusement in their own way. The Zephyrians flickered more rapidly. The Veltar made soft hissing sounds, and the Andromedans produced deep rumbling notes. Chancellor Morden raised one translucent hand for silence.
Ambassador Vasquez, your species' willingness to share is noteworthy. However, the Deep Space Exploration Initiative requires participants with proven judgment and technological sophistication.
After careful consideration, the Council has voted. Elena felt her stomach drop, though she kept her expression neutral. The motion to include humanity in the Deep Space Exploration Initiative fails by a vote of 47-3, the Chancellor announced. The official reason for exclusion is insufficient technological sophistication and questionable judgment protocols. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, but she remained standing calmly. Around the chamber, she could see satisfaction on many faces. Some delegates had the grace to look uncomfortable, but none spoke in humanity's defense except for the loyal Centaurans and two smaller species.
I see,
Elena said quietly. And I suppose this decision is final?
The Council has spoken, replied Chancellor Morden. Perhaps in a few centuries when humanity has had time to mature and develop more
sophisticated approaches to complex problems. Elena nodded slowly. She gathered her datapad and stood, her aide, David Chen, rising beside her. The chamber watched as she walked toward the exit with measured steps. At the doorway, she turned back to face the assembled delegates. Her voice carried clearly through the crystalline chamber. "We understand your position," she said, her tone perfectly controlled. "Humanity will act accordingly." Without another word, she walked out, David following close behind. As soon as they were in the corridor, David activated his secure communicator. "Send message to Earth Command," he said quietly. Protocol 7, immediate implementation. Back in the chamber, the delegates had already moved on to other business. Most barely noticed the human's departure. Those who did assumed it was simply another example of human emotional instability. Ambassador Isakala commented to her aide, "Perhaps now they will understand their proper place in the galaxy." Chancellor Morden flickered with what might have been satisfaction. Sometimes difficult lessons are necessary for the growth of younger species. Only Ambassador Quill of the Centaurans seemed troubled by what had just occurred. He watched the doorway where the humans had disappeared, a growing sense of unease settling in his mind. Elena and David walked through the station's corridors in silence until they reached the human embassy section. Once inside Elena's private office, David sealed the door and activated privacy screens. "Protocol 7, he said quietly. "Are you certain about this, Ambassador?" Elena looked out through the transparent wall at the stars beyond. "They've made their position clear, David. After 3 years of trying to prove ourselves, after sharing our knowledge freely, after saving their colonies and solving their problems, they still see us as primitive children. The Exodus protocols will take months to implement fully," David warned. "Once we begin, there's no turning back." Elena continued gazing at the stars. "Then we better get started. Send the message." David typed the coded instructions into his communicator. Within minutes, the signal would reach Earth and spread to every human colony, research station, and settlement across known space. "What do we tell the other species when they ask what we're doing?" David asked. Elena finally turned from the window. "We tell them the truth. We're going home." Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation lounge of Kepler Station, watching the last transport ship dock with the massive orbital facility. Through the viewport, the blue-green world of Kepler 442b turned slowly beneath them, its surface dotted with the agricultural installations that had fed 3 different alien colonies for the past 2 years. "Evacuation complete. Director," reported Lieutenant Martinez as he approached with a datapad. "All non-essential personnel are aboard the transports. Essential systems are running on automated protocols." Sarah nodded, though her attention remained on the planet below. "What about the research data? Complete archives downloaded and secured. We've left copies of all non-classified materials in the station database as ordered." Martinez paused. "Ma'am, are you sure we should be leaving so much behind? The agricultural techniques alone are worth billions of credits." "Those techniques were developed to help people," Sarah replied. "If the other species can make use of them, good for them. We're not leaving out of spite, Lieutenant. We're leaving because we need to find our own path." The evacuation of Kepler Station was happening simultaneously across dozens of human settlements throughout the galaxy. The process had begun 3 weeks ago with a coded message from Earth Command, and now the massive undertaking was nearing completion. On the mining world of New Colorado, Foreman Jack Morrison supervised the shutdown of the largest thorium extraction operation in the sector. The alien species had always been curious about human mining techniques, particularly their ability to extract rare minerals from supposedly depleted sites. "Sir," called out his deputy, Maria Santos, "the Veltar Mining Consortium is requesting permission to inspect our equipment before we leave." Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. "Tell them they can have whatever we leave behind, but we're not giving tours. Our people come first." What the aliens didn't know was that human success in mining came not from better equipment, but from better understanding. Human geologists had spent years learning to read planetary formations in ways that other species overlooked. They noticed subtle patterns, followed hunches, and combined scientific analysis with what they simply called gut feelings. The equipment they left behind would work for a while, but without human operators who understood the subtle art of reading a world's geological story, the mines would eventually fail to produce the yields everyone expected. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Ambassador Elena Vasquez was coordinating the largest logistical operation in human history. Her temporary command center buzzed with activity as reports came in from across human space. Colony ship Aurora reports departure from the Vega. System announced communications. Officer Park, all residents of New Sol and New Lagos are aboard. Agricultural installations left operational for local populations. Medical facility at Rigel Station has transferred all human staff, reported another officer. They've left complete medical databases and treatment protocols for the 3 alien species they were serving. Elena made notes on her digital pad. The scope of the operation amazed even her. In just 3 weeks, humanity was withdrawing from nearly 100 worlds, stations, and installations. Yet they were doing it quietly, without fanfare or dramatic announcements. "What's the status from the Andromedan border regions?" Elena asked. "All research stations evacuated," replied Commander Walsh. "Dr. Peterson's team finished downloading their archaeological databases yesterday. They've left complete records of their work on the ancient Forerunner sites." Elena frowned slightly. The archaeological work had been particularly important. Human researchers had developed techniques for dating and interpreting alien ruins that seemed to work better than the methods used by older, supposedly more sophisticated species. They had a talent for seeing patterns and making connections that others missed. And the trade routes? That's more complicated, Walsh admitted. "We've withdrawn our navigation services and shipping coordinators from 37 major trade routes. The transition plans have been filed with local authorities, but, Elena prompted. Some of the routes are already showing signs of disruption. The shipping companies are reporting navigation difficulties in sectors where we used to provide star chart updates." Elena wasn't surprised. Human navigators had spent decades mapping space lanes, identifying hazards, and optimizing shipping routes. They had freely shared this information with all species, but their knack for finding the safest and most efficient paths had become something other species took for granted. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On agricultural worlds, human farmers were shutting down operations that had turned marginal planets into garden worlds. They left behind their equipment and detailed instructions, but not the intuitive understanding of soil, weather, and crop rotation that made their methods work. On research stations, human scientists were packing up decades of work. They left their data and findings, but took with them the creative thinking and unconventional approaches that had led to breakthrough discoveries. In medical facilities, human doctors and nurses were completing their final shifts. They left treatment protocols and diagnostic procedures, but not the compassionate bedside manner and holistic approach to healing that had made them so effective with alien patients. The Andromedan Intelligence Service was among the first to notice the pattern. Agent Zaxthon compiled reports from across the sector, noting the systematic withdrawal of human personnel from key positions. "They're not acting aggressively," he reported to his superiors. "Military installations are being shut down, not reinforced. Defensive systems are being deactivated, not upgraded. If anything, they appear to be reducing their overall presence in contested space." His supervisor, Commander Velcon, reviewed the data with satisfaction. Perhaps the Council's decision has reminded them of their proper place in the galactic order. "A defensive posture shows wisdom. But sir," Zaxthon continued, "they're not just withdrawing from contested areas. They're evacuating from their own colonies, from civilian installations, even from worlds where they were invited as guests. Velcon dismissed the concern with a wave of his crystalline hand. Humans are emotional creatures. They're probably sulking about the Council's decision. They'll be back once they realize they need the protection and resources that membership provides. What the Andromedan intelligence services didn't understand was that the humans weren't withdrawing to Earth or to nearby star systems. Long-range sensors showed human ships heading toward the galactic rim, but then the signals disappeared into the vast darkness between galaxies. On New Geneva, the human colony world that had served as a cultural center for the entire sector, Mayor Chen Li supervised the final evacuation procedures. The world had been home to universities, art galleries, and cultural exchange centers that served dozens of species. The museum archives? She asked her assistant. Complete copies left in the planetary database, he replied. The Centaurans and the Rigelians have both requested permission to maintain the facilities. Chen Li nodded. The humans had built something beautiful on New Geneva, a place where different species could meet, learn from each other, and create new forms of art and culture together. Now they were leaving it behind, hoping others would continue what they had started. As the last transport lifted off from New Geneva's spaceport, Chen Li looked back at the city they were abandoning. The buildings still stood, the parks were still green, and the cultural centers still held treasures from a dozen worlds. But without humans to serve as cultural bridges and interpreters, she wondered how long the dream of interspecies cooperation would survive. The evacuation continued for another week. Human families packed their belongings and boarded ships bound for destinations known only to the highest levels of Earth Command. Scientists and engineers gathered decades of research and innovation. Farmers and miners collected the tools and knowledge they would need to build new lives. By the end of the fourth week, human space was empty. Facilities stood ready for new occupants. Databases full of freely shared knowledge awaited new users, and trade routes remained open for other species to manage. The galaxy's older civilizations began moving to fill what they saw as a temporary vacuum. They assumed the humans would return eventually, perhaps more humble and willing to accept their proper role as junior partners in galactic civilization. They had no idea that humanity had just begun the greatest migration in the history of any known species, a journey not to another star system or galaxy, but to an entirely new way of existing among the stars. 6 months had passed since the humans quietly departed from galactic civilization, and the first cracks were beginning to show. Merchant Captain Isivara of the Veltar commercial fleet stared at her navigation display in frustration. The cargo route from Rigel Prime to the Centauran colonies had been profitable and reliable for years, but now her ship sat dead in space. Its navigation systems completely confused by what should have been a simple hyperspace jump. "Status report," she hissed to her navigator. "The star charts show we should be in the Altair system." "Captain," replied Navigator Veltos, his scales rippling with anxiety. "But the stellar readings don't match. We're somewhere else." Isivara slithered over to examine the readings herself. The navigation computers were displaying error messages she had never seen before. "When did we last update our navigation database?" 2 months ago, Captain. We downloaded the latest charts from the Central Navigation Authority. And before that? Veltos checked his records. Before that, we were using the human-compiled star charts. They updated them every few weeks with new hazard warnings and route optimizations. Isivara felt a cold realization settling in her stomach. The Veltar had always been proud of their advanced technology and mathematical precision, but she was beginning to remember how often they had relied on human navigation services without really thinking about it. "Contact the Central Authority," she ordered. "Tell them we have a navigation emergency." 3 systems away, the Andromedan research vessel Crystalline Insight was experiencing similar problems. Commander Velcon stood in the ship's laboratory, watching his best scientists struggle with equipment that had worked perfectly for decades. "The stellar positioning array is functioning normally," reported Chief Scientist Morgan. "But the calibration is wrong. All of our measurements are off by margins that make no sense." "Have you checked the calibration protocols?" "Multiple times, Commander. The protocols are based on the standard Andromedan mathematical models that we have used for centuries." Morgan paused, his crystalline features flickering with uncertainty. "However, I found some additional calibration files in the system. They were created by the human technical staff. Velkon's pride bristled. We don't need human assistance with our own technology. No, sir, of course not. But when I restored the original Andromedan calibrations, the errors increased dramatically. It seems the humans were making subtle adjustments that we never noticed. That's impossible. Our technology is far superior to anything humans could create. Morgan gestured helplessly at the malfunctioning equipment. Yes, sir. But somehow it worked better when they were maintaining it. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On agricultural worlds that had relied on human farming techniques, crop yields were dropping dramatically. The Zephyrian colony on Kepler 442b was experiencing its first food shortage in decades. Colonial Administrator Lumthara flickered with frustrated patterns as she reviewed the agricultural reports. The human farming methods are clearly documented in our databases. Why are our yields only 60% of previous harvests? Her agricultural supervisor, Kethmal, had been studying the problem for weeks. The documentation is complete, Administrator. Soil preparation, seed selection, irrigation schedules, fertilizer application, everything is recorded in precise detail. Then why isn't it working? The humans, they made adjustments. Small changes based on daily observations of weather patterns, soil conditions, plant growth. They seem to know when to deviate from the standard procedures. Instinct, Lumthara dismissed. Primitive intuition has no place in scientific agriculture. Perhaps, Kethmal replied carefully. But the plants don't seem to care whether the knowledge came from science or intuition. They're dying without the humans' adjustments. The problems were not limited to technical and agricultural issues. Cultural and social difficulties were emerging as well. Ambassador Quill of the Centaurans sat in his office, reviewing reports from across his territory. The human cultural centers and educational exchanges had been taken over by other species, but participation was dropping steadily. The Rigelian students are complaining that the xenobiology courses are too rigid, his aide reported. The Altarian art colonies are struggling without human translators. And 3 different species have withdrawn from the cultural exchange program entirely. Quill rubbed his elongated forehead with one 4-fingered hand. What exactly did the humans contribute to these programs? According to the records, they served primarily as facilitators and interpreters. They helped different species understand each other's perspectives and find common ground for collaboration. Surely other species can perform the same function. His aide hesitated. We've tried, sir. But somehow other species trusted the humans to be neutral mediators. When we try to facilitate discussions between traditional enemies like the Veltar and Andromedans, both sides suspect bias. Quill began to understand. Humans had served as cultural bridges precisely because they were outsiders. Too new to have ancient grievances. Too optimistic to assume conflicts were permanent. The medical sector was experiencing the most serious problems of all. On the hospital station orbiting Vega Prime, Chief Medical Officer Zurgeth of the Altarians faced a crisis he couldn't solve. The mortality rates are increasing, reported Dr. Velmina. Not dramatically, but consistently across all patient categories. Are we following the established medical protocols? Precisely. Every treatment follows the documented procedures left by the human medical staff. Zurgeth reviewed the data on his display. The numbers were troubling but not catastrophic yet. What has changed? The humans had a practice they called holistic treatment, Dr. Velmina explained. They considered not just the immediate symptoms but the patient's emotional state, family situation, cultural background. They spent time talking to patients, providing what they called emotional support. Emotional support is not medicine, Zurgeth stated firmly. We are scientists, not counselors. Yes, sir. But the survival rates were higher when the humans were providing that support alongside the medical treatment. The most significant problems were appearing in the realm of diplomacy and conflict resolution. Without human mediators, old disputes between species were flaring up again. The Veltar-Andromedan border dispute, dormant for decades, erupted into violent confrontations when trade negotiations collapsed. The Rigelian colonies were threatening to withdraw from the Galactic Council over taxation disputes. 3 minor wars had broken out in sectors where humans had previously served as peacekeepers. Council Intelligence Director Thane Kamor sat in his office, compiling reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The humans had been gone for only 6 months, but the effects of their absence were becoming impossible to ignore. Sir, his assistant entered with another datapad, the latest economic analysis. Thane reviewed the numbers with growing alarm. Trade efficiency is down 18%. Agricultural output has decreased by 22%. Medical outcomes have declined by 15%. Yes, sir. And the diplomatic situation continues to deteriorate. Thane set down the datapad and looked out at the stars. How is this possible? The humans were junior members of the council. Their technology was primitive compared to ours. Their lifespans are barely a fraction of the elder species. Perhaps, his assistant suggested carefully. Their value wasn't in their technology or their longevity. Then what? According to the analysis, humans had an unusual talent for making systems work better. They improved everything they touched, but in ways that were subtle and hard to quantify. Thane considered this. Like what? They served as facilitators, mediators, cultural translators. They provided creative solutions to problems that older species approached with rigid thinking. They seemed to have an instinct for cooperation that other species found infectious. The word hung in the air. Infectious. As if cooperation was a disease that humans spread wherever they went. Sir, his assistant continued, there's something else. Long-range sensors have detected energy signatures in the deep void beyond the galactic rim. The scale suggests massive construction projects. How massive? Comparable to building entire star systems, sir. Thane felt a chill run through him. Who has that kind of capability? According to our records, no known species possesses such technology. The implications were staggering. If humans were building something that large in the empty space between galaxies, they were far more advanced than anyone had realized, or perhaps, Thane thought with growing unease, they had always been more advanced. Not in technology, but in something far more important, the ability to bring out the best in everyone around them. And now they were gone, taking that ability with them. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council faced a crisis that no one had anticipated. Chancellor Morden flickered with agitated patterns as he reviewed reports from across known space, each document painting a picture of steadily declining civilization. The Deep Space Exploration Initiative has lost its third expedition, announced Exploration Director Kethmar of the Rigelians. The RSS Discovery vanished 2 weeks ago while attempting to navigate the Void Nebula region. What happened? Asked Ambassador Isiskala of the Veltar, though her hissing tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Navigation failure, most likely. The stellar mapping in that region was incomplete. Kethmar hesitated. The area had been flagged for detailed surveying by human astrogation teams before their departure. An uncomfortable silence settled over the council chamber. The Deep Space Exploration Initiative, the very project that humanity had been deemed unworthy to join, was turning into a disaster. How many ships have we lost now? Chancellor Morden asked quietly. 7 vessels with a total crew of nearly 3,000 beings, Kethmar replied, all in regions where human navigation services would have provided detailed hazard assessments. Commander Velkon of the Andromedans shifted in his crystalline seat. Surely our navigation technology is superior to whatever primitive methods the humans employed. Our technology is more advanced, Kethmar agreed. But human navigators had an intuitive understanding of space that our computers seem to lack. They could sense dangerous areas and predict stellar phenomena that our models miss. Superstition, dismissed Ambassador Thexnor of the Zephyrians. Primitive intuition cannot replace rigorous scientific analysis. Tell that to the families of the lost crews, Kethmar replied sharply. The tension in the chamber was palpable. What had once been a unified council was fracturing along old lines, without human mediators to smooth over disagreements and find common ground. Ancient prejudices were reasserting themselves. Ambassador Quill of the Centaurans stood to address the council. With respect to my colleagues, we need to acknowledge the reality of our situation. In the year since humanity's departure, every major system in our civilization has experienced significant degradation. Temporary adjustments, insisted Chancellor Morden. We are simply learning to operate without unnecessary dependencies. Quill gestured to the data displays around the chamber. Trade efficiency down 28%. Agricultural yields decreased by 35%. Medical mortality rates up by 22%. Diplomatic conflicts at their highest level in 2 centuries. How long before we admit these are not temporary adjustments? The Veltar ambassador's scales rippled with irritation. The Centaurans have always been too friendly with the humans. Your judgment is clouded by sentimentality. My judgment is based on evidence, Quill replied firmly. The evidence shows that our civilization functioned better with human participation. Impossible, stated the Andromedan representative. Humans were technologically inferior in every measurable category. Then explain why everything worked better when they were here, Quill challenged. The question hung in the air unanswered, because none of them could explain it. The humans had been younger, shorter-lived, and less technologically advanced than any other council species. Yet somehow their presence had made everything run more smoothly. Director Thane Kimore stood to deliver his intelligence report. The situation is more complex than we initially understood. Our analysis suggests that humans were not simply participants in our civilization. They were essential integrative components. Explain, ordered Chancellor Morden. Humans served functions that we didn't recognize because they seemed so natural. They translated not just languages but concepts and cultural perspectives. They mediated disputes not through superior wisdom, but through an unusual ability to help conflicting parties understand each other's viewpoints. Thane activated a holographic display showing trade route efficiency over time. Look at this data. Trade routes managed entirely by single species show declining efficiency over time due to accumulated biases and assumptions. Routes that included human coordinators showed steadily improving efficiency. Why? Asked the Zephyrian representative. Because humans ask questions that the primary species stopped asking long ago. They noticed inefficiencies that others had learned to accept as normal. They suggested improvements that seemed obvious only after implementation. The display changed to show medical outcomes. Similar patterns appear across all sectors. Human medical staff didn't have superior technology, but they had superior outcomes because they treated patients as complete beings rather than collections of symptoms. Another shift showed agricultural data. Human farmers succeeded not through advanced equipment but through adaptive thinking. They adjusted their methods based on real-time observations rather than rigid adherence to established protocols. Ambassador Isakala's tail lashed with frustration. You make them sound like miracle workers. Not miracle workers, Thane replied. But they possessed qualities that we had lost through millennia of specialization and rigid thinking. They maintained curiosity, adaptability, and empathy at a species-wide level. The implications were staggering. The council species had spent centuries becoming more advanced, more specialized, more efficient. But in doing so, they had lost the flexible thinking and emotional intelligence that allowed for true innovation and cooperation. There's more, Thane continued. Long-range reconnaissance has confirmed massive construction projects in the void beyond our galaxy. The energy signatures suggest technologies we don't recognize, but the scale is beyond anything in our historical records. Who could be responsible for such construction? Asked Chancellor Morden. The timing and location suggest human involvement, but the technological capabilities required exceed anything we observed during their time with the Council. Perhaps they were hiding their true abilities, suggested Commander Velcon. Thane shook his head. Our analysis indicates otherwise. The technology appears to be genuinely new, developed after their departure from our space. How is that possible? We believe they may have achieved breakthrough innovations through collaboration with other species that chose to leave with them. This revelation shocked the chamber into silence. The idea that humans might have convinced other species to abandon established galactic civilization was almost unthinkable. Which species? Quill asked quietly. Thane consulted his notes. Several minor species that we had classified as developing or primitive have also vanished from their traditional territories. The Tyrellian aquatic colonies, the crystalline morphic collective, the energy-based lumina, at least 15 species that rarely participated in council activities. Species that humans had established friendly relations with, Quill observed. Exactly. Species that other council members largely ignored because they lacked obvious strategic value. Chancellor Morden flickered with what might have been concern. Are you suggesting that humans somehow convinced these species to join some sort of exodus? The evidence suggests a voluntary migration to unknown space, yes, but why? What could they hope to achieve in the empty void? Thane activated one final display, showing energy readings from the deep void. Based on the construction signatures, they appear to be building something unprecedented. Not just colonies or space stations, but infrastructure on a galactic scale. A competing civilization, Commander Velkan stated grimly. Or, suggested Ambassador Quill, a better one. The words hit the Council like a physical blow. The idea that humanity and their allies might be building something superior to the ancient galactic civilization was almost impossible to accept. But as the Council members looked around the chamber, noting the empty seats where human representatives had once sat, observing the increased tensions and decreased cooperation among the remaining species, they began to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe the humans hadn't left because they were inadequate for galactic civilization. Maybe they had left because galactic civilization was inadequate for them. Chancellor, Morden's voice was subdued when he finally spoke. What do you recommend, Director? Thane hesitated before answering. I recommend we attempt to establish contact with the human exodus. If they have indeed created something superior to our current system, we need to understand what we've lost. And if they refuse to share their achievements? Asked the Veltar ambassador. Then we may need to ask ourselves why they would refuse, Thane replied, and whether we would deserve their cooperation if they did. The council session ended in uncomfortable silence, each representative returning to their quarters to contemplate a future that no longer seemed as certain as it had just 1 year ago. 2 years had passed since humanity's quiet departure, and the Galactic Council was finally ready to swallow its pride. Chancellor Mordun stood in the communications center of the council station, surrounded by the most advanced long-range transmission equipment available to their civilization. After months of debate, argument, and increasingly desperate circumstances, the council had voted unanimously to attempt contact with the human exodus. Signal prepared for transmission. Chancellor, reported Communications Director Velterra, we're broadcasting on all known human frequencies and including universal translation protocols. Morden flickered with nervous energy. Crafting the message had taken weeks of careful negotiation among council members. Each word had been debated, analyzed for potential misinterpretation, and revised multiple times. Begin transmission, he ordered. The message began with formal diplomatic protocols, acknowledging humanity's former membership in the Galactic Council. But as it continued, the tone became increasingly humble, a difficult adjustment for species accustomed to viewing themselves as superior. To the human government, wherever you may be, the message continued. The Galactic Council formally apologizes for its previous decisions regarding human participation in council activities. Recent events have demonstrated that our evaluation of human contributions was incomplete. It was the closest thing to an admission of error that the ancient species could manage. We request the opportunity to open diplomatic dialogue regarding renewed cooperation between human civilization and the Galactic Council. We are prepared to offer full membership status and participation in all council activities without restriction. The message concluded with technical data about humanity's empty territories and the Council's willingness to provide resources for human resettlement in their former space. Then came the waiting. Long-range communications across galactic distances took time, and no one knew exactly where the human exodus had gone. The signal would propagate outward for months before reaching the suspected construction zones beyond the galactic rim. While they waited, the situation in council space continued to deteriorate. The Veltar-Andromedan border conflict had escalated into open warfare. The Rigelian colonies had officially withdrawn from the council. Food shortages were becoming common on worlds that had once been agricultural paradises. Ambassador Quill sat in his office, reviewing reports from his territory. The Centauran colonies were among the few maintaining stability, partly because they had always maintained friendly relations with other species, a trait they had learned from human example. Sir, his aide entered with an urgent message pad. We're receiving a transmission from the Deep Void region. It's unusual. Quill took the pad and examined the data. The signal is broadcasting on human communication frequencies, but the transmission power is enormous. Whoever sent this has access to massive energy sources. There's more, sir. The signal isn't just directed at us. It's being broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously. Quill felt his heart skip a beat. A general transmission to the entire galaxy? Who has that kind of capability? The answer came 3 days later when the message was finally decoded and translated. It appeared on every major communication network in the galaxy at the same time. Impossible to ignore or suppress. The image that appeared was immediately recognizable to anyone who had dealt with humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Though she looked older now, her hair showing silver streaks that hadn't been there 2 years ago. She sat in what appeared to be an observation lounge, with a view of stars and nebulae that no one recognized. "Greetings to the species of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying the same calm dignity that council members remembered. "We received your message requesting renewed diplomatic contact. We appreciate your apology and the offer of full council membership." She paused, and something that might have been sadness flickered across her features. "However, we must respectfully decline." The words sent shockwaves through council space. They had expected negotiation, demands for better terms, perhaps even justified anger. But flat rejection had not been anticipated. "Over the past 2 years," Elena continued, "humanity and our allies have built something new in the space beyond your galaxy. We have created a civilization based on cooperation rather than hierarchy, on inclusion rather than exclusion, on shared growth rather than competitive advancement." The camera pulled back to reveal more of her surroundings. Through the observation windows, massive structures were visible in the distance, space habitats and installations on a scale that dwarfed anything in council space. We call it the Harmony Collective, and it includes not just humanity, but dozens of species that chose to leave the galactic community in search of something better. The Terrellians, whose aquatic cities you dismissed as primitive, have developed biotechnology that surpasses anything in your archives. The Morphic Collective, whose crystalline society you ignored, has created computing systems that make your best networks seem crude. The implications were staggering. The species that the Council had barely noticed, the ones deemed too primitive or specialized to matter, had apparently achieved technological breakthroughs while working with humanity. The energy-based Lumina, whom you couldn't even communicate with properly, have taught us to harness stellar phenomena in ways that your science considers impossible. Together we have built not just a new home, but a new way of existing among the stars. Elena stood and walked to the observation window. "We learned something important during our time with the Galactic Council. Cooperation is not just a nice ideal. It is the foundation of true advancement. When species work together as equals, when they share knowledge freely and support each other's growth, the results exceed anything that can be achieved through competition and hierarchy." She turned back to face the camera. "Your message mentioned that systems have been failing since our departure. That was not our intention when we left. We never wanted to harm the galactic community. But perhaps those failures illustrate an important point. A civilization that depends on the contributions of species it considers inferior may need to reconsider its fundamental assumptions about superiority." The message continued with technical details about the Harmony Collective, population, figures that suggested billions of beings, energy outputs that implied mastery of stellar engineering, and territorial claims that encompassed multiple star systems in previously empty space. "We are not broadcasting this message to boast about our achievements," Elena explained. "We share this information because we believe that all intelligent life deserves the opportunity to reach its full potential. The borders of the Harmony Collective are open to any species that chooses cooperation over domination, inclusion over exclusion." She paused and her expression softened slightly. "This includes species from the Galactic Council, should they choose to join us. But membership in the Harmony Collective requires a fundamental commitment to equality and mutual support. There are no senior and junior partners here, no ancient wisdom that supersedes current innovation, no hierarchies based on age or technological advancement." The final portion of the message was directed specifically at the Council leadership. To Chancellor Morden and the Galactic Council, "Thank you for your message and your apology. We accept your acknowledgement of past errors, and we wish you success in addressing the challenges facing your civilization. However, we have found our own path among the stars, and we are content with our choice. If your species choose to join us, they will be welcomed as equals. If you choose to remain with the traditional council structure, we wish you well. But we will not be returning to a system that measures worth by longevity rather than contribution, that values tradition over innovation, that mistakes age for wisdom." Elena smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the young diplomat who had once tried so hard to prove humanity's worth to species that couldn't recognize it. The galaxy is vast enough for multiple approaches to civilization. May yours bring you the peace and prosperity that all sapient beings deserve. The transmission ended with technical data about Harmony Collective territories, communication frequencies for species interested in learning more, and a simple closing statement. The future belongs to those who build it together. In the council chambers, the response was immediate and fractured. Some species expressed outrage at humanity's rejection. Others quietly began exploring the possibility of contact with the Harmony Collective. A few announced their intention to withdraw from the council entirely. Chancellor Mordun sat in his private chambers, reviewing the message for the dozenth time. The technical specifications were undeniable. Humanity and their allies had achieved something unprecedented in the space beyond the galaxy. More troubling, they had achieved it by working together in ways that the Council had never managed. His aide entered with reports from across Council space. Sir, the Rigelians have announced their intention to send a diplomatic mission to the Harmony Collective. The Altarians are requesting information about immigration procedures. Even some Centauran colonies are expressing interest. Mordun flickered with patterns of resignation. And the traditional species?